Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the All-NBA show. Do not adjust your YouTube feed or your television set or whatever you're working with. I am not Adam Mares. I am Andy Bailey filling in for Adam today to co-host the All-NBA podcast with the legendary Tim Legler, a.k.a. Legs. This show is presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Get started with a $150 bonus on your first $5 bet when you go to FanDuel.com/AllNBA. Again, I am Andy Bailey. I'm happy to be here today, and especially happy to be co-hosting a show with Tim Legler. It's kind of crazy to me, but Legs, how are you doing today?
What's up, Andy? I'm good, man. Great. Welcome. First of all, great to be on with you. And I don't know, I think you and Mares could have been distant relatives. You don't know. I mean, a little bit. I don't know what your basketball game is like. I know Mares has got the Jokic game going on. Like, that's a very grounded, intelligent game. I don't know. What would your game be? Give me a player comp in the league.
That's a good question. I used to always say I was kind of like an Austin Crozier when I used to play.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. I love that name drop right there.
I used to play, or I played against Adam a couple times, and typically, you can't really see it on the camera, but I'm like 6'7" and almost 300 pounds. And so in most media runs, I can kind of bully people. I can't bully Adam. He's got these long arms. He moves pretty well for a guy his size. He's a fun matchup and pickup for me.
Hey, speaking of which, I'm glad this is coming up here at the top. I'm going to tease something. Is James Adam back on Friday?
Yeah, he'll be back on Friday.
Okay, so I got someone say something to me yesterday, and I just can't shake it out of my head, involving Adam Mares and his basketball game, from a person that knows it, like played against him on a court in pickup, said something to me that is probably the worst thing he could have possibly said to me. And I could just take it with me to my grave rather than blow up Adam's head. But this person said something very complimentary about Adam's game, and I'm gonna have to go over it with him on Friday. So I'm teasing that right now. You're not gonna want to miss that, because I couldn't believe his name came up from this person, a colleague, that we're just walking from the studio back to the hotel, and we talked about the podcast. So Adam's name came up, and then boom, he drops this one-liner on me about Adam's basketball game, and so I'm teasing that for Friday.
That is a heck of a tease, and I'll just put a cherry on top of it. He can play, and I think he has some kind of record at his school for blocked shots.
Oh, trust me, I know what it is. It's the block shot record. He's been over it 100 times. I mean, it's practically a segment on the show at this point. The block shot record. I know he's a great shot blocker.
I don't need to toot Adam's horn, sounds like.
No, he's actually very humble. He's very humble about his game, but at the same time, I love Adam because it'll come up. He's got this sort of quiet, just like, okay, yeah, I did some things. I can play a little bit. But the shot block, the record has come up a few times. But no, this is going to be, people are going to love hearing this. And I probably shouldn't even tell Adam this. And actually now I'm debating, and I might not even tell him. But anyway, just tune in Friday and find out.
Yeah, you got to come through. Well, Legs, we had an interesting game. We had a couple interesting games last night, but the one we want to start with was the Bucks versus the Warriors. And I think we kind of knew coming in that there was a chance Stephen Curry might not play, and he indeed did sit this one out. And that almost made the game more interesting to me. And I think it kind of expanded my takeaways on it. But I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience is curious to know what you thought of Warriors-Bucks last night.
Well, okay, so first of all, you got going into the game, I was very curious. I also expected Curry not to play, and he didn't play. You kind of almost knew that from the way he looked not just the other night against Denver, but I thought the game before that against Sacramento when they threw this really glorified box and one on him. I haven't seen a team sell out to one player off the ball the way Sacramento did in that game on Steph Curry. I had never seen it to that extent. It really reminded me of like when two high school teams play and one team's got the one Division I player on it, right? And they're in the same league and they just sell out completely to take this guy off the ball. He even faced that at Davidson, where he very famously ran and stood in the corner and basically two guys standing there face guarding him in the corner and let his team play 4-on-3. And that's what the Kings did to him. And he looked gassed, man. He just was like, you know what? I really don't have the mental or physical strength right now to fight through this type of defense. So he let them play that night, basically 4-on-4, and the Warriors handled the Kings no problem. And then the game comes the other night with Denver, and it just all of his off-ball movement, his cuts, his lift on his shot, like everything, and we knew it. And sure enough, he sat. So now you're wondering what's this going to look like? Well, this is what you got Jimmy Butler for moments like this. Whether that's a quarter in a game where Steph's in foul trouble, or maybe he has an injury in the playoffs, or who knows. And now this is what you got Jimmy Butler for. Let's see. So going in, you're wondering how they're going to operate their offense. And it wasn't like, Jimmy Butler had a very good game. He got to the line a ton. It wasn't like he went off. And that's kind of Jimmy's MO. Not going to go off and go get 40. That's not really who he is. But he's all about control. And he controlled the game, and he controlled the fourth quarter. And the game was slower played without Steph on it. The pace was slower. I thought Golden State's defense was incredible. And they've been playing great D for like 6 weeks. Their defense in this game is incredible. I think Draymond Green, I don't know if he'll ever win another defensive player of the year. Probably not. But if he wanted to just put together a reel from a game this year and make his case while he's still an all-league caliber defensive player, it'd be this game, because it wasn't, and it's not just block steals. It was bottling up Giannis, like playing him so smartly and making Giannis very frustrated. And so for me, this game came down to Jimmy Butler's control of their offense. And just the way he played in the fourth quarter when the game was still tight. And then Draymond's defense on Giannis, really, to me, those are the two things that sum the game up.
Yeah, those are huge takeaways. And they're kind of mine too. I mean, I think we all knew one of the main reasons Golden State needed Jimmy Butler was those non-Curry minutes. And the Warriors haven't been as like dramatically dependent on Curry as they were during the height of their dynasty. But he's still obviously super important to them. And that Jimmy Butler can run an offense, he can lead a defense, and he's been doing that as the alpha in Miami for years now. And these snippets where he gets to do it in Golden State, it looks an awful lot like it did in Miami. He's such a refined, controlled player on both ends of the floor. And the sample size on this is still really small. It's less than 500 possessions, so maybe not worth like huge takeaways, but they're plus 16.5 points per 100 possessions when Butler plays without Curry so far. And I think a lot of the guys that they have on the team to surround him with when Curry's off the floor really makes sense for his game too. Like a stretch five like Quentin Post makes a lot of sense with Jimmy Butler and his slashing ability. They've got other shooters they can spread the floor around him with Pajemski and Moses Moody. So they've got, I think, a supporting cast that makes sense for him. And then obviously everything is sort of supercharged when both guys are available, when Curry and Butler are together. And so the sort of anomaly against Denver aside, I think they're very much a real contender now. Like the West seems like it's this way every year for the last 20 to 25 years, but there really aren't any matchups. And this may be kind of a spoiler for what we'll talk about later, but I think Golden State could be matched up theoretically with anyone, and I wouldn't be shocked if they beat anyone. Like I think they could even match up against OKC if they, slipped back into the play-in tournament, which I don't necessarily see happening. But I think they can beat anybody with this new version of the Warriors that they are.
I think I like your point about Golden State. Like I think what we're looking at right now in the Western Conference is and Golden State reminded you of this last night. And it's not like you were going to take too much away from the Denver game. I mean, that's a terrible loss Just make no mistake about it. You play that game at home on a night when Minnesota loses the way they did, which was inexcusable, to lose to the Pacers sitting 4 starters and their 5th starter getting ejected in that game, and you still can't guard them. Didn't make any sense to me. But here you are, Golden State, and they're obviously in this dogfight battle with the Timberwolves to get out of the play-in. Golden State's got to win that game the other night. There's no mistake about it. They just didn't have it. They didn't have the juice. Denver played really loose and free. They got a credible performance out of Aaron Gordon and Westbrook. And there you go. They beat them. So this game against, Milwaukee was more indicative of what they've been doing for the last month. And they are very much in the mix to lay claim to the team that's going to be there at the end against OKC. I personally think it is OKC and everybody else.
I agree.
They deserve that regard based on the year they've had, based on their chemistry, but mainly based on that's the best defensive team I've seen all year. And they bring it every single night, and they don't have players that you have to sacrifice offense for defense. Yeah, you look at guys like Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins and Cason Wallace, and like these guys are really good on-ball defenders that also give you supplemental scoring punch. So it's not like you're Dagnall's sitting there going, man, do I have enough offense? Do I have enough defense? Nope. Just play who you want. You're always good. You've got enough. And that's why they're so elite. That's why they're so good. So I do think their defense ultimately will be the tipping point against any of these teams. But to your point, we don't know who that's going to be because these seedings are so crazy right now and they're so locked up. We have no idea what that's going to look like. So I think the goal is avoid 8 and avoid 4 or 5 if you can, because then you're guaranteed to not see Oklahoma City as far as you can out in the future. That to me is what it's all about. Golden State's defense is going to give them a chance against any of these teams. That's what it comes down to for me. Their offense can be spotty. They still turn the ball over sometimes too much. They turned it over 18 times last night, which if you do that against OKC, you're giving up 30 points off of that. Yeah. You're not recovering from that. So you can't turn the ball over like that, but their defense gives them a chance against all of these teams. And Jimmy Butler's made them smarter, tougher, better on both ends, but like you now feel like there's a toughness factor to their defense that wasn't there before. That's going to give them a chance against any of these teams.
I agree with that. And you mentioned Draymond's defense. And I do think he has, I would maybe call it a fringe defensive player of the year case right now, but it's a real one. And now they have one of the best interior defenders in the league in him and one of the best perimeter defenders in the league in Butler. And so you can kind of work all angles of the floor defensively now. I'm wondering if you have any takeaways on the Bucks from this game. They've been one of the harder teams for me to kind of wrap my head around really all season. I think in terms of the top end talent on their roster, obviously in Giannis and Damian Lillard, I think it's still one of the most talented top duos in the league. But I'm really hesitant to think that they're a real threat to like Cleveland or Boston at this point. And I'm curious if you have a different take.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of the other teams out there beyond the top 2 in the East, I mean, there's a number of teams, Milwaukee, Indiana, the Knicks, right, at the top of the list. Like you look at those teams and you're like, okay, can anybody really challenge those top 2? And when you, at the end of the day, I think Brunson's ankle is going to bother him the rest of the year. And I just think, I don't think the Knicks, they haven't come off to me this year and watching them and saying that is a team that could go toe to toe with those 2 teams. Maybe the Cavs are a little bit susceptible to that. So that leaves Milwaukee and Indiana. I think Indiana is a very interesting team because their offense is so hard to guard when they're playing to their pace. That's a very difficult team to guard, make very quick decisions. Everybody can shoot on that team. They're smart, but they're also a little bit inconsistent. And Halliburton has been better over the last 2 months than he was earlier in the year, but I still think there are nights when he disappears a little bit offensively. So that leaves the Bucks. And for me, it's just like, at the end of the day, Giannis is one of those guys that can play with such force on a given night or in a series that can keep you in it. Now, the one thing I'll say about them, they don't look complete right now because they're not. I mean, missing Bobby Portis is an enormous deal for them because of just the energy he provides, the consistent bench scoring production as a shooter, spotting up. He's got the turnaround jumper in the post. You can run your offense to him a little bit, but also just as a rebounder and an offensive rebounder. So Bobby Portis missing makes it very difficult to know exactly where the Bucks are in comparison to Cleveland and Boston. And so we're going to have to find that out when they get back. To me, this game was a little bit disappointing for them. So Golden State doesn't have Curry. You know their numbers are going to come down a little bit offensively without him. They should be easier to guard. And yet, they go for 104 points. Great. You did your job. They go for 104, which is a very anemic number in this league anymore. You score 93 of your own. 93 points by NBA standards is unthinkable almost for a team with that kind of talent on it. So I'm not really thinking the Bucks are some massive threat to beat Cleveland or Boston. I just know the Giannis factor is going to keep me interested in whoever they play because he's capable of putting up such huge numbers, keeping your team in foul trouble, dominating the paint, slowing down your break because of where he's operating from. He's just such a unique player. And I look at all those teams in the East and I go, yeah, because they have him, there's one Giannis and they have him. I give them the best chance probably of really giving one of those two teams an extended series.
Yeah, I think that's a good breakdown of it. I would pick Boston or Cleveland over Milwaukee, I think, pretty confidently. But in basketball, there's only 10 guys on the floor, and a lot of times having the best player in the series can go a long way toward winning it. And he's obviously still capable of being that against anyone. So it wouldn't blow me away if the Bucks upset either one of those teams. But like I said, I'd probably pick either one of them pretty comfortably. Anything else on Bucks Warriors before we move on, Legs?
No, I think this is, I just, as far as the Warriors are concerned, I think this thing with Steph is interesting because I didn't feel this way about him in just in terms of the way he looks physically until literally the last couple of weeks. And it's interesting because we were just, praising Jimmy Butler coming, he's going to allow Steph to rest and he's going to be able to rest. And it's like, okay, well, that's not happening right now. And maybe this is just attrition from what he had to do before Butler got there. But I don't know to what extent can you get this guy fresh legs going into the playoffs when you're desperately trying to avoid the 7, or the 8. I mean, there's no question. Like there's no doubt yet that you're out of the 8 spot. I mean, you got a team like the Clippers, they're still in the hunt. If you're 8, that's a big deal. You go on the road for that first game. And if you lose that game, your season's now hanging on one game. They'll be playing the winner of the 9-10. Let's just say you win that game. Your reward is OKC.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here, how important it is. Get into the 6, avoid the play-in, so you're not susceptible to a bad night or 2 or a rolled ankle or somebody has a bad shooting night or foul trouble or whatever it may be. Get out of that situation. And so the fact that you got to win, because you're battling this team in Minnesota and the Clippers, and yet you still have to figure out a way to get Curry as fresh as you can for whatever you need later on. I'm just going to be really watching that intently to see how they manage that going forward so that Steph feels like he can, carry a team offensively once they get to that point where you're either one and done or you're going into a 7-game series.
Yeah. That's this is maybe a conversation for another day, but the dynamic of being a Western Conference team is just so much different. I mean, it's really completely up in the air after the Thunder at this point. So it's just a different ball game for them, and it's going to be hard.
Well, I said to someone yesterday, if you gave me a hat and you wrote every team in the West's name on it, outside of OKC, and you're just trying to make an argument why Team X is the last team standing against OKC. And you put Houston, Denver, the Lakers, Memphis, Golden State, Minnesota, and even now the Clippers, who are very interesting.
Yep.
That now wait a minute, you're going to inject this level of Kawhi Leonard into the equation this late in the year and expect us to have to analyze that? It's so hard. But even the Clippers now, because of the way Kawhi looked last night, and you're like, who knows if it's sustainable with him? But I could pull in one of those names out of a hat, and I'd make a compelling argument for all of them, with the exception maybe of Houston. I don't know that I could really make that argument with Houston, that they're going to beat 2 of those other teams and be the last team against OK. That'd be a hard argument to make. I think I could make that argument for Denver, for the Lakers, for Memphis, for the Warriors, clearly for Minnesota, and now the Clippers, even with Kawhi. I think there are people that would be willing to make that argument. So that's how wild the West is, with how even that those teams are. And I think they're all capable of beating each other in a 7-game series. So let's see what happens here over the last, 13 to 15 games for these teams, and give us hopefully a much better idea when you get to April 13th, the evening of April 13th, when the smoke is cleared and the last regular season game has been played and we're getting ready for the play-in. Hopefully we'll have a much better idea of what we think that pattern is going to look like in the Western Conference playoffs.
Yep. Stretch run's going to be wild in the West, and so will the first round probably. But that, I think, wraps us up on Warriors Bucks and a couple tangents that I think relate to it. And we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about those Clippers that Legs just alluded to.
First, Timeline sells health longevity supplements featuring their proprietary MitoPure ingredient. The cells in our body are the building blocks of life. Timeline is a supplement that works with those cells to help give you more energy, feel stronger during workouts, and preserve health and mobility as you start to age. The patented ingredient is MitoPure, a postbiotic nutrient that clears our dysfunctional mitochondria, aka your cells' battery packs. A lot of science here for you guys. I'm going to act like I'm a scientist. With regular use, you'll see and feel the difference in the form of improved energy levels, better workouts, faster recovery, more endurance, and more. MitoPure recharges your cells and helps your body system to work better. MitoPure is the only supplement clinically proven to rejuvenate health at the cellular level. MitoPure is shown to deliver double-digit increase in muscle strength and endurance without a change in exercise, and that is a win. So get ready to be your best, most energized, most revitalized self. Right now, Timeline is giving you 10% off of your order of MitoPure. Go to timeline.com/allNBA. That's timeline.com/allNBA to get started today. It's really easy, and you can use that code AllNBA when you check out. Also want to tell you guys about Monarch Money. I just filed my taxes this last year. Tell me if you've ever gone through this. You're going through all of your expenses throughout the year, and you see an expense pop up that you're like, I don't remember signing up for that. Or maybe, I did a trial run of that and forgot to cancel. Happened to me this year. It happens all the time. Finances can be messy and confusing. Monarch Money acts like your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control so you can stop earning and start growing. It's more than your average budgeting app. Monarch Money is a complete financial command center for your accounts, investments, and goals. Don't just manage your money. Start building wealth with 50% off your first year just for our listeners. They have those great tools that want to help you monitor what's going in and out of your account, but also to monitor your investments and see how they're performing. So it's a complete financial planning tool that's great, and people love it. It was named Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025, the top recommended personal finance app by users and experts with over 30,000 five-star reviews. Get control of your overall finances with Monarch Money. Use code AllNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code AllNBA. And you see that link in the description of the show.
We are back. Thanks to the recorded version of Adam for giving us a little break there. The other game that really stood out to me last night, I think there were, some fun things about the Hawks and the Celtics, but really it's the Clippers and the Cavaliers that I think are worth talking about. The Cavaliers had their full complement of guys. They had the big four all starting. They've obviously been a juggernaut all season. I think almost underrated in terms of how much of a juggernaut they've been historically. But they went into LA last night and they could not beat the Clippers, who looked like a very real playoff threat. And it obviously has a lot to do with this version of Kawhi Leonard that we saw last night. And I think a supporting cast that really fits their top two of Leonard and Harden really well. I think Kawhi specifically is probably the biggest takeaway, Legs, but talk about him all you want, but is there anything else from this game that really stood out to you?
I think what Zubac did against this front line. I mean, Zubac is a guy that I talk about whenever I can get a chance because of how much I admire him. Claimed him as one of my guys. Adam had a problem with that because he thinks he's better than that. Like, he can't be a guy if he's playing that well every night. I disagree with that because most people still in the national narrative are not bringing the guy up. So all he did against this front line that we've been talking about all year, and the combination of Mobley and Allen, and the way those two guys have meshed, the emergence of Mobley as just a more dynamic player. Jared Allen, one of the best interior rim protectors in the league, and all Zubac did was go out there and drop 28 points and 20 boards on them and just really maul them up front. It was just so impressive to watch what he did, in addition to the way Kawhi looked. 33 points, and he had 7 baskets that were not threes. And when he first came back from his injury, I was concerned that we were ever going to see Kawhi Leonard again be remotely explosive. And that doesn't mean dunking on guys, on drives. I'm talking about just getting to your spot, holding your balance, and shooting a strong mid-range jumper, which is what defines him. And because early on, man, he would have no lift. Everything was front rim, or he was just shooting threes, or he would drive and had no lift to finish a layup, and he would put weird English on it. And I'm going, man, it's sad. I don't know if he's ever going to recover to the extent that he has to, to be a really effective offensive player. He's doing that right now. And it's okay, how do we view the Clippers now? Because most of the year, the way I have viewed them is they play really hard. They've got athletes on the perimeter. They compete. So you got to work against them. You got to show up to play. And Zubac again in the middle too, the hard hat mentality. You better be ready to play against the Clippers. But at the end of the day, what do they have? Norman Powell has had this incredible year offensively. He's carrying them. Harden kind of up and down with his shooting, but still running the show, but not as explosive as he used to be. And that's your offense. And then whatever Zubac cleans up, that's just not enough with Kawhi, the uncertainty there. Well, now how are we supposed to view them? Andy, I ask you, what?
Yeah.
You're injecting this player into this equation this late in the year. They're in the 8th spot. They have a chance at 6. So now Kawhi's playing like this. Do we view them differently? Is this really a team? Everybody better take notice. And again, them against OKC would be fascinating if Kawhi's fully healthy. What a disastrous reward for the Thunder. Hey, man, you had a great year. Your reward is going to be the Clippers getting Kawhi Leonard back, and he looks like he did when he was an all-star. Go ahead, deal with that in the first round as a 1-8. That's just almost not fair. But it's the same, I guess you could say, if they end up with the Warriors and Jimmy Butler. This is your reward for a 1-8 matchup. It certainly doesn't look like the East and what those teams are going to get in the 1-8 and the 2-7. Doesn't look like that. The West is totally different. And Kawhi Leonard, to me, has made this very, very interesting what's going on right now with the 6, 7, and 8 spots in the West.
Yeah, to answer your question, I think we have to look at them differently. I mentioned this in the last segment, but I would say for the last several weeks, it was 2 to 7 felt really wide open in the West, and now it has expanded to 2 to 8 at the very least, with the Clippers now as a real threat. Because if they have a healthy, this version of Kawhi Leonard is, I hesitate to say this because it's been a long time and he was spectacular at this point, but he almost looks a little bit like he did in 2019 during the title run with the Raptors. And it's kind of hard to think about how long ago that has been at this point.
No.
But there were moments during that game against the Cavaliers where he's hitting that turnaround fadeaway, or he's pulling up in transition, and it just looks like prime Kawhi. And maybe he can't summon that as consistently as he did when he was a Raptor, and that's understandable given his age and injury history. But if he can do that in 4 out of 7 games, the Clippers have a chance against just about anyone. And maybe we can even say anyone. They're fantastic. And I think the other thing about the Clippers that makes them a team that we have to take seriously into the playoffs, I think their supporting cast is better now too. I think the Bogdan Bogdanovic pickup was huge. He was not himself for whatever reason for those first few months with the Hawks this season. I don't know if he was, lingering injuries or just fatigue from the Olympic run. But I would guess most of the audience watched him in the Olympics when he was with Serbia. There's sort of a killer instinct with him that I think is really interesting from a sixth man. And he has shown that, I think, a little bit more in the last couple of weeks with the Clippers. He was perfect from the field last night against Cleveland. He has sort of a knack for hitting those back-breaking jump shots, and I think he makes their bench a lot more interesting. You mentioned Norman Powell, who's been awesome this season. I think Zubac is another guy who maybe has a fringe Defensive Player of the Year case. He probably won't win it, but I think I could make a reasonable argument for him. And the other thing that stood out to me last night as I was watching that game is Paul George had a good season last year, and his half decade with the Clippers was really good. But I think they may have completely made up for his absence in the aggregate. They didn't get one player to replace him this offseason, but the moves that they did make this past summer and then the moves they made at the deadline during this year, I think they now have a supporting cast that, everybody teaming up together kind of makes up for that missing star that they had in George.
I like that breakdown of the roster, and I want to focus a little bit on Bogdanovic because I think he's one of the more underrated acquisitions that we've had in this league. He doesn't get a lot of play, a lot of talk. He's playing really well right now, and he's obviously good enough to be a starter on a lot of teams, a lot of situations. This is where they need him to be because, like, for instance, last night they started Chris Dunn, and I think having a guy like Dunn, and he only played 17 minutes because he got in foul trouble, but he's not going to score much for you. She's not a shooter, but that dude can guard 1, 2s, and 3s as well as anybody in the perimeter in this league. He fights over screens. He cuts off penetration. He's strong. He's a want-to player so he enjoys that end of the floor. So you're better served with that out there with Harden, Powell, and Kawhi, and then bring Bogdanovic off the bench as like your instant offense guy. And so I look at this team and you look at all these names we're throwing out there. I mean, you got to love their top 7 or 8. And you go, man, like you really want to play a team like that, like in the first round of the playoffs. So they're back on my radar. Early on, I did their game opening night, and I was so impressed just with their overall speed. And Tyronn Lue told us before the game they had changed their identity because of, you don't have Paul George there anymore. Kawhi's hurt, so you got James Harden. So he goes, we're going to change our identity to more of a defensive-minded team. And they did it. And I was very impressed that night and all season, but at the same time, thought there's limitations there at the end of the day, offensively. There's just limitations to take them seriously, that you admire them, and they'll be like a tough 6-game series for somebody in the first round, but you can't view them the same way with Kawhi Leonard. He's 4 straight games over 50% from the field. He's 13 for 22 from the 3 during that stretch. He's averaging 36 minutes a game in March. I never thought Kawhi Leonard would average 36 minutes a game for any stretch of games. The rest of his career, I would have been surprised on any given night if Kawhi Leonard played 30 minutes. And he's averaging 36 over this stretch. He's played 40 twice in March, 40 minutes. I mean, so he's obviously, and you don't do that unless you're getting indications that this guy not only can do it, but he's feeling great the next day. That's the key thing for me. So now I'm looking at the Clippers and just keeping an eye on this. Like, it's almost like it's like a storm forming right out in the Gulf. And like, I live in Florida, so you're like paying attention. It's like a week out. And you're like, okay, but I should probably pay attention to this thing, but we're not ready to evacuate yet. That's where we're at with the LA Clippers. Let's watch them here over the final stretch. I think they're one of the more interesting teams in the league because of all the reasons we just laid out.
It's a great analogy. We will refer to the Clippers as the storm for the next couple of weeks, the potential storm. Any takeaways on the Cavs from this game? I just kind of think like I said, they've been a juggernaut all year, particularly on the offensive end. And I don't think they're going to like shut it down over the last few weeks of the season. But a lot of times what we see with a team that has a huge separation between themselves and second is now might be the time to prioritize being fresh in the playoffs. And I don't think they did that last night to take away from the Clippers. But it might be something that they look at over the next couple of weeks.
The only thing I'll say to that, Andy, is the Oklahoma City Thunder are tied with them, 56-12. So
overall first seed, yeah.
For best overall record and having home court in the finals, I think that's both of these teams, are viewing everything differently than they would. One's got a 12.5 game lead. One has shrunk to 6.5. That's interesting. Boston's not catching them. You're not making up 6.5 games in 13 games. Like, that's not going to happen. But I do think a couple things. One, the fact that they've lost 2 in a row after that 16-game winning streak is interesting. And I called the Orlando game, and I was just so blown away by Orlando's effort and desire in that game on a night when their best two players didn't have good shooting nights, and they still found a way to win that game. Was so impressive to me. So, and I chalked that more up to Orlando than I did like anything I took away negatively about Cleveland in that game. This one, though, I'm going, okay, you lose that game. You're in this dogfight with OKC for best overall record, and bounce back against the Clippers on the road and show that defense that's been like top 8 in the league most of the year. Like, let me see that. And they give up 130 plus. So I'm not sitting there going, I'm saying, scratching my head like, okay. I'm not at that point or anything like that because I've watched Cleveland all year. I'm so impressed with their team. But at the same time, one reason they're going to have to, I think, play this thing out is the thing with Oklahoma City, and also just write your own ship and get back to where, like, you can defensively clamp down the way that you have most of the year. Because right now, you lose to Orlando, then you let this team get loose. You can't reel them in. Cleveland, I think, is a team right now that's important that they finish the year really strong going into the postseason because if that negative narrative is in the air, like they, whatever, let's say they go 8-6 the rest of the year and they end up 1 in the East, but they lose home court to OKC, and they're like, okay, that narrative that's in the air all the time, teams don't need that going in. So I think it's important for Cleveland to have a good stretch here over the last few weeks to close it out.
You know this better than me, obviously, because you played in the NBA. And I'm not sure how many former NBA players I've directly asked this, but where it sounds to me like you kind of come in on the avoid rust side of the rest versus rust equation. How important is it to be in like a rhythm heading into the playoffs?
Look, I would tell you this. I would be trying to find the perfect balance. I'm not all about, forgetting rest. I know it's important. You want to prioritize that. You want guys feeling good. Cleveland is a deep team. They've played a lot of guys. They don't really tax guys on a nightly basis. It's a little bit different. It's not like the Knicks where like there's not a lot of depth and like guys you feel like are going to get worn out and you have no choice if you want to win games. They have got depth and they rely on the depth. And so I think I'm not too worried about that. But if you're telling me I'm still playing for home court in the finals, I'm not worried about rest as much. I think that's really important. If that carrot is out there, you want that, man, because you should be expecting to be in the finals. If you're not expecting that and you're the Cleveland Cavaliers, there's something wrong. Despite who the Boston Celtics are, and they get Porzingis back now, and everybody knows what they represent. You're the Cavs. You've had this kind of a year, a historic year for your franchise. You've been great on both ends of the floor, prolific offensively. Then you should be, if you got something to play for it. That's the way I would look at it, because I don't think their guys are getting worn out on a nightly basis because of the depth that they have. I think you could just play your normal rotation, maybe a little bit cognizant of it. I haven't looked at their schedule all the way to the end, but if you got an opportunity where you see a couple of games in here, and I'm sure they got some, you got Utah on Sunday, March 23rd at Utah. That might be a good night to not maybe full-fledged sit guys, but really prioritize minutes. That might be one that you kind of target. San Antonio at home on Thursday, March 27th. Okay, here's a great night. Maybe you sit a couple of guys. I think they have the opportunity to potentially sit some guys and still win. Right. Because I think winning is important if you have this opportunity with OKC.
Right. Well, that take makes plenty of sense to me. I think we've kind of wrapped up on Clippers Cavs too, unless you have any other thoughts there.
No, that's it, man. I think we got a cool segment we want to get to next, so I think we should roll.
That's right. That segment, we talked about this coming in to the episode today, is some playoff matchups that we want to see. Like we've mentioned a couple times already, pretty much anything is up in the air in the West. Like you could pick two teams and conceivably see them playing each other in the first round, which is cool. There's still a little bit to be decided in the East, maybe not quite as much, but there is the potential for some really cool series in the postseason this year. So I'll let you start, Legs. What are some playoff matchups potentially that we could see that you'd be excited about?
All right. So I think I kind of broke it down, like what would be really intriguing for me in the first round. And then with a little eye toward, hey, this will be fun second round matchup too. So let's see if we can pair them up to make that happen. So in the East, it almost would be something where it would play out kind of like as they're currently listed for me. Cause in the West, it wasn't that way. I moved some teams around, and it's still possible, where they could end up in the seedings that I wrote down. In the East, I kind of kept it status quo as it is right now. So I got the 1-8 Cleveland Orlando, and that's based on what I just watched last Sunday. Like, that was a fascinating game. That was a tough, physical, hard-nosed game with the Ty Jerome, Paolo Banchero, verbal stuff mixed in there, which made it just more spicy. And I'm not saying that Ty Jerome and Banchero, we're going to that'll be the marquee matchup that we put up there before the game if that ends up being an ESPN playoff series. But I just thought physically what Orlando did to Cleveland in that game, it made it more interesting to me, man. Yeah, so let me see a best of 7 with those two teams as the 1-8. And then the 2-7, Boston, Atlanta. I don't care who you're going to get at the bottom there to play Atlanta. I mean, Boston, it's not going to be much of a series, but at least that one, I think that the Trae Young factor against the Boston Celtics, that could be add a little bit of hot sauce to that. And Atlanta is a fun team that can get rolling. They can be very good offensively some nights. And if Boston falls into the trap, they want to shoot 55 threes in a playoff game and keep Atlanta in the game, that could be fun to watch. 3-6 Knicks Detroit, simply an alley fight. Yeah. The Pistons are going to come with some brass knuckles. They're going to have brass knuckles on it. They're going to want to get into it with you and make that physical. There'll be some talking with that young group. They've got a star player in Cade Cunningham. A 2-point guards, Cunningham going up against Brunson would be a lot of fun. Stylistically kind of similar. Nobody's in a hurry. Cade's bigger. And so they very productive, go about different ways, but neither one of those guys are a blur athletically. So that could be fun. And just the Pistons, the way that they would embrace the physicality of that series. Josh Hart and Anunoby going up against those young, physical, hungry wings. I think that could be a lot of fun, which leaves Indy Milwaukee as the 4-5, which has been, there's no rivalries really in the league, but they've had a little bit extra here over the last couple of years, with what went on in the play-in a year ago. They've had some really interesting games. They stole Giannis's ball, the night he broke a scoring record and he had to run into the tunnel and try to hunt somebody down to get his ball back. That what happened just recently with the Halliburton 4-point play right in front of their bench to beat them. And then they bounced back the next week and ended the tiebreaker by beating them in that 4th game of the year. So I think there's something in the air between those two teams. So I think for me in the East, those would be matchups that I'd like to see.
Yeah, those are all fun. And it's interesting that if we just ended the season today, that's what we would get. Orlando is a team that I have felt like all season long. And obviously they had a wave of injuries that was just devastating. But even after everybody except for Suggs came back, I still have felt like they should be a little bit better than they are. And I think I can say that about Paolo Banchero specifically. I still think he has some things to work out with his game in terms of, shot selection and offensive consistency. But when they're clicking, they're a really talented, interesting team. And so I've said this a couple times about a couple different teams now, but I would pick Cleveland, obviously, in a series against Orlando, but Orlando is an interesting matchup with them. And if there was 1-8 matchup for Cleveland that could get interesting, I think it's probably that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm not saying that they found a blueprint that night to beat them. And you could say, well, Cleveland had a brutal shooting night, and Kenny Atkinson alluded to that. But the only really open ones that were not made, that were just should have been, Sam Merrill had a stretch where he had 5, naked threes, and he's an elite shooter. He just had one of those nights, it's just what it is. But most of those threes, including the 2 at the end of the game that Mitchell took, highly contested. And I felt like that was most of the game. And that was Orlando. Man. They were desperate to win that game. And they were able to do it. And it just kind of made me think wow, team like that against a team like Cleveland that last year beat them in a 7-game series in the first round. And, that was a very close game in the fourth quarter. And Franz Wagner at one point was like 1 for 15 in that game. Or maybe Orlando wins that series.
Yeah.
And then Cleveland goes, and of course they lose to Boston in the next round. So you feel like Cleveland, look, this has been an incredible year, but at the same time, there's not a lot of collective playoff winning that these guys have done together. And so now you play the same team you had to play last year to go 7 games with in the first round. You get them again in the first round. I just think that would be a cool storyline, man. A rematch from a year ago when that thing went 7 games. And look, missing Suggs is brutal for Orlando. They got those 2 star forwards. They're a great defensive team, 3rd best defensive team in the league. They just need on a given night, man, somebody help me out with some shot making. The game that I did last Sunday was Anthony Black. Gave him 17 points. So they got just enough from one of those guys, whether that's Cole Anthony or Anthony Black or Jonathan Isaac or whoever it may be. Corey Joseph rolls back the whoever. Just those 2 good forwards are going to give you a chance. Please, somebody make some shots because they're an anemic 3-point shooting team. That night it was Anthony Black, and that's all they needed was like a little splash of offense to go with all this other stuff they do, and it was enough to beat the Cavaliers on their home court. Made Orlando very interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would be pretty shocking if they got that little extra that they need 4 times out of 7 against Cleveland, but not impossible. You mentioned that things are still kind of up in the air in the West. I mean, we could see it like almost an infinite combination of matchups, but there's a couple potential ones that are interesting to me. I'm curious to get your thoughts on them. One that I think is interesting, we've mentioned OKC, and I agree with you. They're on their own tier in the West. Defensively, they're a juggernaut. They've got an absolute super duper star in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, just having a insane season. I think the best context for how good SGA has been this year is Nikola Jokic is averaging a triple-double with a true shooting percentage like 10 points above league average, and it's not crazy that he is probably not going to win MVP. That's how good SGA has been. So all of that rambling is to say that I'm going to pick OKC pretty much in any series in the West, fairly confidently. But if the first round, if Minnesota stumbles into that 8 spot through the play-in, I think that's a team that can make things pretty interesting for them. I think teams are going to get a little bit more gimmicky defensively against SGA in the playoffs, and I think Minnesota has the personnel to do that. They've got a lot of really athletic, really switchy defenders like Jaden McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and I think even Edwards to some extent. And they can trap, they can do some box and one type stuff with SGA. They still have Rudy Gobert, who's, he's not the perennial defensive player of the year that he was a few years ago, but he's still one of the best rim protectors in the league. And then Edwards is capable of some pretty ridiculous offensive feats of his own, and he's been even better in the playoffs than he's been in the regular season throughout his career. So they're a team that I think can at least make things interesting for OKC, even if it's in the first round and it's the 1-8 matchup.
That's the one I wrote down. That's the one I wanted to see. And I agree with you. I think Minnesota, and they did it earlier this year in a game I was watching, they incorporated some interesting strategy against Shai, which I hadn't seen teams go to, where they really went to this really extended 1-2-2 for a stretch of possessions where they were literally blitzing him as soon as he came across half court with the guy on top in the wing. And it was Nickeil Alexander-Walker on top. Jaden McDaniels was one of the wings. Anthony Edwards was the other. I mean, that's about as athletic as you get on the perimeter defensively with the reach, the length, the lateral, foot speed. Because Anthony Edwards is a very committed defender. He takes it very seriously. And then behind him, you got Gobert as your last line of defense. And he actually, there were times when you can go smaller. Naz Reid is the 5, and he's fast, and he's all over the floor. So he's a different type of defender, but equally as effective in a different way. That to me would be a really tantalizing first round matchup. Of course, I would pick the Thunder as well, because I just think people are doubting their collective playoff experience. That's how I felt last year, and I didn't expect them to make a run through the West, and they lost in the second round of Dallas, and it's about what I expected. This team feels different to me. First of all, offensively, the punch is there. They're getting it from different places every night, but their defense and what they do in think about the metrics. Number one, these two things should not go together. Number one in the league in defending the paint. Number one in the league in defending the three.
It's crazy.
They're not supposed to go together. It's one or the other. Pick and prioritize. And you may be top five in one of the not number one in the league. They're also number one in defending against points on turnovers. So they turn it over. Assisted turnovers number one in the league, by the way, which is pretty important. But when they do turn it over, they don't give up anything because their collective speed and commitment to getting back and stopping the ball is so strong. So all these different metrics defensively, it allows you to make up for bad shooting nights because you're not hanging your hat on making threes. You're hanging your hat on that end of the floor. And then, of course, they also averaged 130 points a game for a 6-week stretch. Okay, so it's not like they're winning games, 102-98. They can also shoot you out of the building, but they don't have to do that on a given night. That's why, to me, they're so interesting. But I would love to see that matchup at the 1-8-2. I think that would be the best one we can get in the first round.
Yeah, they're a monster. And to kind of like wrap everything up that you just said numbers-wise, simple rating system just combines point differential and strength of schedule into one number. And this OKC team is currently first all time, like ahead of those legendary teams like the 15-16 Warriors and the 72, I think it's 72 Lakers, 71 Bucks. This is a historic dominant season, and usually numbers like that tell you that the team is probably going to win the championship or at least be in the finals. One more to touch on real quick because I think we're running short on time for this segment, but I'm also curious to see if the Lakers and Nuggets meet up one more time, because this is not the Lakers and Nuggets matchup that we're used to. I think honestly, the craziest, most unexpected event of my 15 years covering the NBA was the Luka Doncic trade. And he obviously just completely changes the dynamic of that matchup. And even though Denver has pretty well dominated this team in playoffs and regular season over the last few years, I would be tempted to pick the Lakers because they have so much shot creation on the perimeter now. And Denver really doesn't have a ton of perimeter defense. So with Reeves, LeBron, and Luka, that's a trio that's going to be really hard for anybody to stop, especially the Nuggets.
Well, look, the Lakers, the way they played defensively leading up to LeBron's injury, you can't deny it. And actually, that turnaround started before the trade, before they got Luka. They were already kind of turning their season around defensively. And, I'll give JJ Redick a lot of credit for that. Clearly he has ideas about that and a vision. And over time, those principles and those things you want to address every day, attention to detail, that they'll start to kick in. And they were. And then they made the trade, worried about what that's going to look like with Luka. It's a totally different defensive look. You got to protect him in a certain regard defensively. They kind of figured that out. They were playing great defense. They swallowed up the Nuggets in that kind of eye-opening game when they just swarmed Jokic, guy in front, guy behind the entire game. And Luka and LeBron clicked in that game offensively. And that's when people started like going, oh, wow, here we go. And they were playing great and he gets hurt. So now we got to see when he gets back. Assuming he gets back, it looks great, which no reason to think he won't. Lakers are a massive X factor in the Western Conference, but that's not the first round matchup I want to see. So I'll finish this segment with this. The one I want to see, for old time's sake, and there's only one way to guarantee you get this matchup, so it has to be the first round because you don't know beyond that if both teams win their first round series. I wouldn't mind seeing LeBron and Steph one more time. You give me a Lakers Golden State first round series, which is very possible because the Lakers still have the two they could be 2, 3, 4, and the Warriors, they could be at 7, so as long as the Warriors aren't 8, it could happen because the Lakers aren't getting to 1. So you could get it, and then you're guaranteed to get one more time because you never know how many more times you're going to get it with where these guys are in their career. Steph Curry, LeBron James, give me a best of 7 with two teams that reinvented themselves at the deadline with Luka and Jimmy Butler acquisitions look a lot different than they did at the beginning of the year. And then these two, players of their generation going at it one more time. The only way to guarantee it, first round.
Yeah. It's honestly, I'm not breaking news here, but it's truly remarkable that those two still are this compelling and are still on teams that I think you can make a compelling argument could make deep runs. It's truly unreal. Who knows if we'll see something like this again with two guys at this level at the same time for this many years. It's just wild. If you don't have any other matchups we want to hit, we do have one more segment to get to, Legs. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it. We got the shout outs.
Yes, sir. So now it's time for shout outs, presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. As I mentioned at the top, get started with a $150 bonus bet when you win your first $5 bet on FanDuel.com/AllNBA. I am going to start us off on shout outs. I want to talk about Zaccharie Risacher. I think maybe, I don't know how you would quantify this, but he's probably the least discussed #1 overall pick maybe ever. Certainly of the amount of time that I've been covering the NBA, like even #1 picks who are bad are heavily discussed for that reason because they've been pretty bad. But Zaccharie Risacher has very much flown under the radar this season, and he got off to kind of a slow start, but this is kind of a random sample, but since January 30th, he's averaged 14 points a game. He's shooting 45% from three. His rebounding and his assist numbers, those are still developments that he's going to have to make over the next few years. But I think we now see a foundation of a guy who can be a pretty interesting 3-and-D player. Very consistent outside shooter for the last couple of months. And it's not just the corners too. He's hitting a lot of above the break threes. His length is obviously interesting on defense. And you want more than a 3-and-D guy out of the #1 overall pick. And I do think he has star upside if he figures out how to play make a little bit and how to rebound a little bit more. But at the very least, he's become a guy I think is going to be a rotation player for a long time in the NBA. And that it might have been a little bit concerning and discouraging the first couple months of his rookie season, but he's been really good lately. So he's a guy I wanted to spotlight.
I'm glad you did. I think it's a good one. And I think my ceiling for Risacher is a starter on a team that's like a top 4 type team in one of the 2 conferences. I think he can be that. I don't know if he'll ever be an all-star, but he's got a beautiful shooting stroke. He's very active. He moves really well. He likes playing defense. He can put it down a little bit. That should improve because he's so young. But You're right, man. Like #1 pick, I guarantee you, if you went and you polled 100 people at some event that you knew there was a lot of NBA fans there, and you said, who was the #1 pick in the draft last summer? I don't know how many people would name him because
I've done that with random friends and family members of mine. Like,
no chance.
Have you ever heard of Zaccharie Risacher? And a lot of them haven't.
Yeah. You're like, oh yeah. Isn't that a cooking show? I love that guy. You're like, no, he's the #1 pick in the draft last summer. He's actually had a really good rookie year for the Hawks. So I really like him a lot. I think that's a good one. Mine is, and I already mentioned him once earlier, and I've talked about their team. I'm going to go with Anthony Black because, one, the game he had against the Cavs and how critical that was, that they won that game and that he did what he did, give him 17 points. But he's 21 years old. He's got great length. He's a very good defensive player already. He's got great instincts for that. His offense is emerging. He's over 50% from the 3-point line in the month of March on a team that is dead last in 3-point shooting in the NBA. Like it's if they don't put some shooting around Banchero and Franz Wagner going forward and prioritize that, man, I don't know what they're doing organizationally, because it's very difficult to win in the NBA when you don't have any spacing around those guys. So someone has to give it to you. Anthony Black's been doing that. Now, it's not a high volume of 3-point shots, and his release is still a little bit longer to get off, but that's okay. It's got to start somewhere. The ball's got to start going in first, and he's more selective, but he's making the shots he's taking now. I think he's got more upside there. And then the defensive ability gives you a guy that, deserves minutes. So he's a guy I'm going to be looking at going forward. I know it's one of Adam's guys. I told him I could steal him for a day to talk about him today in my shout out. But Anthony Black, interesting player and somebody I think I'm going to be keeping an eye on here over these last 12, 13 games to see what he does to help Orlando and then in their first round series.
Yeah, that's a great one. And a potential, I think a real potential X factor for a first round playoff series for Orlando. Well, Legs, I think we've done it. I think we hit everything that we wanted to.
We did it,
rundown.
man.
Yeah. Producer James, do we have any super chats to hit, or it sounds like the music's playing us out.
We just got one super chat in. Let me throw it up here for you guys.
Okay, from Mike but Noik. Oh, Mike but no Ike. That's better. What will convince you guys that Nuggets are back? Geez, that's a good question. I'll let you start, Legs. What would convince you that the Nuggets are back?
Their defense has to be much more consistent than it's been. I'm looking at this stretch coming up. So you got a road trip, and I'm on the call tonight. I'm in LA right now. I'm going to be on the call with Mike Breen tonight for this Lakers Nuggets game. Good place to start. I know the Lakers don't have LeBron, but they got Luka and they got Austin Reeves. That's a lot to deal with right there. And they've played well offensively here lately. Good time to start, assuming Jokic plays, and we don't know. Like, these guys didn't play the other night, and I thought it was just a one-off to get ready for this game, to be honest with you. But now you're hearing it. We're not sure exactly, so we'll wait and see. We'll get more information today. Who's playing? Let's start there. Let's bottle them up and show me that you can come up with a defensive game plan you can execute against these teams. You also have Houston on this road trip on Sunday, so I need to see them tighten up their defense. To answer you, I don't love their depth. They don't necessarily need all that depth with Jokic and Murray and Michael Porter Jr. as an X factor. Christian Brown's been great for them. You don't need it as much if your defense is better. I need to see that to answer the question.
I agree with all that. And all I will add is I think what underlies defense at almost all levels and in almost all circumstances is effort. Obviously, you need to know what rotations you need to do and stuff like that, where you need to be on the floor, but just playing hard is really important. And I have flagged this. I do the power rankings for Bleacher Report, and I have flagged this probably 15 times since the start of last season. All of last year, even when they won 57 games, and for much of this year, there are stretches where they don't really play with a ton of fervor. And if you're a league pass guy and you've got the Nuggets on for 20 minutes and then you flip to some younger team, like we were just talking about the Magic, they're a team that plays hard. The difference is pretty stark. So I would need to see them playing hard, and I think that would translate to defense, which is what Legs brought up. So if they can check those two boxes for a couple of weeks, they're a team that I would probably talk about as a contender again.
And I'm going to say last thought on this. I will say, like, getting Aaron Gordon back, and you saw the other night, I mean, he was able to just dial up a 38-point game, which is really incredible that he did that night with all those guys out. Westbrook played great in that game too, pushing the pace. But Aaron Gordon back for them and how different they look just physically, defensively, is a big deal. So I expect those defensive numbers to improve to convince us more, because there was a time not long ago, and we've been playing this game all year, who's the second best team in the West, and I was convinced it was them. Yeah. And then they've been less convincing here lately. But Aaron Gordon was out. It's a major factor. They're not very deep as it is, and he gives you the other size that you need and the versatility defensively. So now that he's back, maybe they can string together some games where defensively they look more like a team that can make a run.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And him specifically and the Nuggets are going to be fun to pay attention to for the last couple of weeks, as is the rest of the league. We got some fun playoff races that are they're going to be fun to watch for the last couple of weeks, and we'll be here to talk about all of them. Again, thanks for having me, Legs. Thanks, audience, for having me, filling in for the legend Adam Mares and co-hosting with the legend, and appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
All silly like the mayor.